mode.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to ACSO's fifth and final webinar of the season. Our topic today about financial control seems like just plain common sense. We take money in, we account for it properly, we pay the bills, we make sure the reconciliation works with our bank, and then we let our treasurer know all this, and he or she makes a report at that board meeting. But Maya, Donna, and Dale Marie will tell you why there is so much more to it than that. Maya has been doing some form of orchestra management for the past 20 years with several Bay Area organizations, and now is at the Oakland East Bay Symphony. Her life is classical music with musician sons and a husband who's in the San Francisco Symphony. Donna reared her lovely head to me in ACSO a couple of years ago, and we're so fortunate to have her wit and wisdom on the ACSO board. A corporate giant for many years, she now serves on 3 boards of directors. And no, I will not give you her phone number or email. Our banker, Dale Marie, has graciously agreed to give us the critical perspective of the financial controls from the bank's point of view, which I am very interested to learn more about. So everyone is on mute now. We'd like to ask that you type in your questions to us, and our speakers will answer them at the end of the webinar. And also to let you know, we will send a PDF of these quite wonderful slides also at the end of the webinar. So, okay, let's get started. And Maya, Donna, and Dale Marie, take it away.
Okay, hi everybody, this is Maya. And I just want to say that we all in our organizations work so hard for raising our money from contributions and ticket sales and investments. So the last thing we want is for it to disappear in the wrong hands. We think this is a really important topic, and we really appreciate ACSO in letting us present this webinar today. Donna will start with some broad organizational observations and talk a little bit about the board's role in controls. I'll then delve into some specific financial controls, and then Dale Marie will discuss the bank's very important role in preventing fraud from occurring, and Donna will wrap it up with some summary comments, and then hopefully we'll have time for question and answer. You have to bear with us because I'm the one controlling the slides, so every time somebody wants a slide to move forward, they will have to tell me that. So, without further ado, here is Donna.
Hi, first Maya, please move the slide. Let's start with a bit of background on why we're doing this seminar. It's why nonprofits seem to be the targets of fraud more often than other kinds of businesses. And so in putting together this webinar, I should say, we thought about that. I think it partly is because our nonprofit world is different from the corporate world. Our mission isn't making shareholders wealthy and happy. It's bringing some valuable treasure, like music, to our community or to the whole world. And along with this altruistic mindset, if you will, we tend to hold our fellow humans in the highest regard. And this translates to a higher level of trust and confidence in all the people around us, something that you wouldn't typically see in the corporate world. It is this degree of trust that enables a potential offender. Most of us operate with limited staff resources. Let's face it, we are, I think, even the largest of us in that world. And when we have limited resources, it's finance and admin that are most limited. Some of the smaller organizations are probably staffed only by volunteers who might not have the financial background that we need to be fully prepared for such actions. Again, a music organization's finance operations can take a back seat. Your board and staff are devoted to making music, building the audience, and constantly raising funds to make all this happen. But all this hard work cannot succeed without prudent and rigorous financial management. Along with the limited finance resources, the smallest organizations may have a board that lacks the financial skills and experience to provide a strong level of board oversight. So this doubles the risk of financial mismanagement, making strong internal controls even more critical. In my experience, board members tend to be more interested in and often experienced with the fun aspects of an organization: planning, development, marketing, artistic production. And in fact, some board members that I know see the finance role as a form of drudgery. Now let's talk for a moment about the role of the outside auditor. The world has come to expect outside auditors to watch out for fraud and financial mismanagement. But while the auditor tests internal controls, hunting for fraud is not their objective in conducting an audit. In any case, most smaller organizations, and perhaps most listeners to this webinar, do not use outside auditors because they aren't required to. So this means that you must have a very high degree of confidence in your internal controls. We all know how electronic technology in particular has changed our world in many, many ways, and financial scams of all kinds are now an everyday occurrence. Electronic banking has made financial activity of all kinds so much easier for all of us, including the clever minds who seek financial gain by devious means. It seems if you can scope out how to build a bomb on the internet, just imagine what someone intent on financial deception of any kind can learn to do. Next slide, Maya. So what we hope to accomplish in this webinar is to go through some ways to secure your finances as much as possible. There is no way to be 100% safe against fraud, but we can create a climate that is secure within the bandwidth of your resources to minimize any incident of fraud. We will talk about the financial policies and procedures that will help to do this, to minimize the possibility again, and to uncover questionable conduct when it occurs. Policies we'll talk about apply to all organizations, large and small. And procedures that we'll discuss can be used by even the smallest. Our banker, Dale Marie, will tell you how banking works with the technology of the 21st century, what banks do and don't do to help you protect your cash. We will briefly talk about how liability insurance fits into your security. Insurance is not an escape hatch from the damage of any evil deeds, but it can be there to help alleviate financial consequences when something bad happens. The key to all of this is to think like the bad guys. They are highly experienced at deception. They are more clever than we imagine. They see opportunity around every corner. Next slide, Maya. In our prep for this webinar, Maya and I interviewed leaders of several organizations in California who had experienced fraudulent behavior by an employee or a consultant. While these incidents were all very different in scale, in timing, in tactics, we found several shared themes that apply to virtually all cases of fraud. Offenders are smart. They're charming and impressive. This obviously makes perfect sense. How else would they get the high degree of trust that we give them that enables them to commit their deceitful actions? We found that background checks are rare, at least in the nonprofit world. Because we are so trusting, we tend to rely on resumes and references. But we know that these can be vague or incomplete, sometimes downright untrue. Many offenders, it turns out, have a prior history of finance wrongdoing, which might have been discovered in a complete background check. "If we had only known" is a common refrain of regret. That's something we don't want any of us to hear. Why does an offender commit fraud? Usually there's some sort of financial distress, hardship, illness, failing business, mortgage, foreclosure, or a financially destructive addiction, gambling, extravagant spending, shopaholicism. Again, as I mentioned earlier, the offender is clever and sees an opportunity, of which there are many, and takes advantage of it. This usually starts small, continues over a period of years, if not found out, and can be anyone. This picture shows a whole lot of different folks to illustrate that the person who commits fraud is likely the one you never suspect of the slightest misconduct. Next slide.
We have about 5 minutes, Donna.
Thanks. Good. So let's start building a framework for financial security. Each organization is unique, but all need financial controls that fit their business needs. So how do we do this? There are lots of available resources outlining standard financial policies for nonprofits, including ACSO. If you need to create these now, you want them to be in writing, to be clearly communicated to everyone, to be understood. Maya and I talked about the possibility of an annual refresher, like a staff meeting roundtable discussion about what works, what seems ineffective, what seems outdated. What do you think, Maya?
Yeah, I mean, it is a good idea to talk about this at a staff meeting. We actually did do this, development and finance and the ED came together and we all talked about how the process of receiving money works and who should do it and making sure that there were controls in place for everything. And that also shows the staff that you're serious about you know, making sure that controls are in place and that there is not a culture there that will allow you to commit fraud.
Good. I'm going to go quickly through some of these to get to the big points. Lockup really means to be cautious. Lock up your computer, protect with passwords, lock up cash, lock up checks, finance records, lock the door when you leave. We talked about background checks, and I want to mention that they are easily available online and through special services. And after what Maya and I have learned in setting up this webinar, we're instituting that policy for the Oakland East Bay Symphony. And one thing that you probably already have thought of, Google can be quite a revelation. The truth clause refers to a clause in the employment act that the applicant signs to certify that it's truthful and not misleading, and that they understand untruth is grounds for termination. And a whistleblower policy, if you haven't heard of that, is one that protects an employee who sees something inappropriate or against company policy in any way and is enabled to report it without retribution. The whistleblower policy designates the person to be reported to, and the IRS Form 990 asks, does your board have a whistleblower policy? Next slide, Maya. Now we get to talk about the buck stops here. The board of any organization, whether it's General Motors or the smallest nonprofit, holds the ultimate responsibility. So we have a fiduciary obligation as board members to purposefully carry out our governance with due care. Board and staff leadership will work together to create and foster the culture of integrity. Your policies and controls will depend upon the size of the organization and the finance staff, but every board must remain vigilant, must approve the annual budget, must review financial reports, and should be asking questions when something is unclear or seems to conflict with the organization's mission. And last point here, the board bears the liability for fraud damages to third parties. That may scare some board members, but it's something you ought to know. The board treasurer is the most involved, and Maya will talk a little bit about that. So let's move on. Maya will talk about a whole lot of the nitty-gritty that this webinar is all about.
Okay, thank you, Donna. There's a lot of points here, and I'll try and go through all of these quickly. But the first point in financial controls that you need to understand, it's not about you. It's about the individual that holds the position. Does the Oakland East Bay Symphony have financial controls because they don't trust me, Maya? I hope not, but anyway, there are controls in place for any person in my position who handles the finances. I'm not going to be there forever, and when the next person comes in, there will be controls in place. I remember a time when an auditor of ours years ago suggested that we get employee dishonesty insurance. So a lot of board members came up to the executive director and asked if there was something going on that they didn't know about, because otherwise why would we need this policy? Well, it's not about if we need it at that time. It's that we need it to protect ourselves so that if something happened, we would be protected. So it's not about you, and don't take it personally. Identify high-risk areas, as Donna said. You got to think like the bad guy would think. You got to think about the ways you do business, and if there's any possible way around certain steps that you take in the management of your financials that would be easy for a criminal to go around. When we first developed our controls many, many, many years ago, I sat down with the treasurer, came into the office for about 2 hours, and we went through every step that we took at the time of depositing, transferring money, paying bills, running payroll, whatever we could think of, and really tried to also think of ways that somebody could circumvent the process. And those were the ways, that's how our controls were developed, is by going step by step and thinking, if you were the bad guy, how could you figure out ways to commit fraud, and then come up with your controls. Separation of duties, I will get into that in more detail in a bit, but just suffice it to say that it should not be the same person receiving money, reconciling bank statements, writing the checks, approving invoices. And I know that's easier said than done in a small organization, which leads me to my next point, which is board oversight and involvement. You know, you have to have the board really involved in order to make sure that your controls are in place. And especially for a small board, there's a small staff, there's just no way around it. If you have one person running the thing, then maybe your treasurer needs to be the one reconciling the bank statements, because it should not be the same person doing everything. And so board involvement and oversight is important in any case, but even more so in small organizations. The board really has to get involved with some day-to-day operational things and not just leave it to one person. Banking and credit authority, there should be controls in place as to who has signing authority for checks and what amount, who has the authority to open a new account on behalf of the organization, who can draw on the line of credit, who can use the company credit card. And board resolutions should state that a specific officer, like the treasurer, has the authority. And then when the officers change, you need to get new bank signature cards and get those issued. Dawn, I know you and I work a lot in this. Is there anything I'm forgetting about?
Well, I was about to say that you probably think I am over-involved because Maya and I do spend a lot of time together. I review the bank statements online, and I ask questions about some big checks that I'm not familiar with.
Right.
Again, we discuss at our executive committee level who should be the signers on the checking account, the investment account, the loans. So this is a thoughtful process to determine the appropriate people. And Maya, you might want to mention the two-signer thing, or maybe you're going to talk about that later.
I will. Okay. Absolutely. Yeah.
I plan on talking about it too.
But Donna is right. I mean, everybody should have a board member like Donna. I mean, she is very involved, and I appreciate that. A board member like Donna would keep anybody honest. I will just say that. The other thing is you can bring in an outside firm to kind of review your operations and see if the controls are in place. Although I did just read a statistic that an outside firm usually only covers a small percentage of the fraudulent activities that are discovered. Documentation for all expenses. For every check that your organization writes, there should be a document attached to it. It can be an invoice, a contract. Sometimes when we're desperate, we use emails from somebody that states the amount to be paid and who it should be paid to and for what service. But an executive director really should never sign a check without a proper document attached to it. And if there isn't one, it needs to be questioned. And if possible, in an organization, the invoice itself that comes attached to the check should be approved by another person who's not signing the check. So in our organization, for example, my marketing director gets an invoice for advertising. She's the one that approves it, signs off on it. Then the invoice goes to either the bookkeeper or me. We write the checks, and then the executive director signs it. So there's a couple of different things in place there that is a good way to go. Bank and credit card statements. Like Donna said, somebody else in the organization should be getting them. In our organization, I get the bank statements, Donna gets the bank statements. And as finance director, I am able to look at the statements to see if anybody has been writing checks that I don't know about. And since I'm the one usually writing the checks, Donna gets a copy as another control. And like she said, she asks questions. And then here's a step to take to perhaps prevent forgery, which we've heard from other organizations. The executive director then gets the bank statements with all the check copies that come with the bank statement and the reconciliations. And as a last step, he initials them. And why does this help? Because if he looks at the check copies, he's going to be the one to see a signature that really doesn't look like his on the checks that were written, or he'll see a copy of a check that he just never has remembered, approving or signing. So that's one way to prevent forgery, which happens quite a bit. Also, the person using a credit card cannot be the same person approving its use. So, check bank balances every day. This is now easy with our online banking. But somebody else besides the person that writes the check should have access to the bank accounts, and you can check your balances every day to make sure there's nothing funny going on. Look at check sequence. So why is this important? If I wrote checks number 1, 2, and 3, and then the next check that I'm seeing that I pull from my check pile is check number 5, I'm going to question what happened to check number 4. Maybe it was a mistake. Maybe somebody wrote a check and voided it. Again, it's important that you keep a copy of your voided checks so that somebody can see that it was a voided check and nothing else. And if it doesn't go into my voided check pile, then I'm really going to question what happened to check number 4. So check sequence is a really good way of keeping track of things. Some of these are no-brainers, but secure cash and property, of course. Don't have cash lying around. Have 2 people know the combination. Only 1 or 2 people have the key to the petty cash. Also, never sign a blank check and have it leaving around. That's another kind of no-brainer. And when you're taking cash out of petty cash and putting it back in, make sure you have 2 people counting it for either way, in or out. Destroy patron credit card data. Oh, I'm skipping ahead. Sorry, vendor review. Getting ahead of myself. So if there's a new vendor that pops up, you as the executive director or whoever is signing a check that you don't recognize, you should really make sure that it is a valid vendor, because this is a situation that we've heard of that happens. You should get a full street address for this person or company, not just a P.O. box office number. And because in many instances, people make up fictitious vendor names. And so the money, and they make up a fictitious invoice that looks like a real invoice from somebody with a fictitious vendor name. And then that's how the money ends up going into the wrong account and into the wrong hands. So you should do a vendor review every so often and make sure that they're all valid vendors. Destroy patron credit card and information. The last thing you want is for your patrons to get upset with you because, you know, their information has been taken and there's identity theft involved. So you don't want to get your patrons upset with you. That also means shredding documents. Testing controls. Again, this is board involvement. You know, have the treasurer come in and sit down and run through some things and make sure that things are happening the way they're supposed to be happening. Better yet, you can have a surprise testing. You can have a board member or somebody walk in unannounced and right then and there and say, let's sit down and review your financial controls and make sure everything is the way it's supposed to be. Another statistic that I read is internal audits like that, where a board member is involved, actually detects about 25% of all fraud cases. Separation of duty. Excuse me, I just need to take a sip of water. Really, this is establishing a system of checks and balances. Like I said, one person should not be responsible for the entire financial transaction. So one person should not be in charge of all the steps for funds coming into the office, like receiving, depositing, recording, reconciling, and nobody should be responsible for all that is involved in money going out of the organization, like approving an invoice, writing a check, signing a check, and reconciling the bank statements. And if it is one person in your office, like we said, we can't emphasize this enough, that is when your board of directors or treasurer need to get involved and come in and do the bank reconciliations. So the more you can divide all the different steps the better. You should also have a second signature policy. So preferably a board member might be a second signer on the check for checks above a certain amount. And that amount can be whatever you determine for your own organization. Smaller organizations might have a policy saying for any check over $500, I'm going to get a second signature. And for our organization, it's a little bit larger. And so what does this do? You're going to be hearing a bit from Dale Marie about the banking side of this, but actually 2 signatures, the bank has no obligation for reviewing the checks and making sure there are 2 signatures that comply with your internal policy. The 2 signatures, it's an internal control. It's putting multiple layers of approval that make it more difficult for an embezzler to steal from your organization. I could go in, well, there's another example. Sometimes I know, say your limit is $500 for 2 signatures and the vendor needs the money right away, or the mailing's not going to go out, or the rent check has to be in. So you can, with controls in place, send the check out, and then when your treasurer or board member gets the bank statement, they will review it and say, like Donna does, hey, I'm noticing some checks over $500 that didn't have a second signature. And you then would have to pull those invoices for those checks, and the person would come in the office and look and make sure that those were valid invoices that were paid. So it's an internal control for an approval process. And then I'm just putting payroll up here because that really is an area where there's such potential for fraud. I won't go into a lot of details, but again, it's segregation of duties. The most important thing for those who use outside payroll companies are the checks coming into the office the same way that they were approved to be paid. So after payroll is run, does somebody look through the actual checks that come in to make sure that they are what they are supposed to be? A lot of fraud occurs with fictitious employee names, inflated hours. So again, the segregation of duties, board involvement, maybe it's a board member that has to open the payroll and make sure that the checks are what they're supposed to be. Now I'm going to turn it over to Dale Marie.
Hi, thank you so much, Maya and Donna, for inviting me to be part of this. And you have covered a lot of things, and your organization get gold stars for sure, because you have covered a lot of exactly what it takes to be protected. I am honored to be amongst so many wonderful symphonies and music organizations. And just so you know, I did serve on the board of directors of the Women's Philharmonic and have helped the Oakland East Bay Symphony with their fundraising efforts. So I certainly get the nonprofit world. Also, I do serve here at Torrey Pines Bank as the head of nonprofit banking, and I know that there are some on the list that do bank with Torrey Pines throughout, so thank you. I think the biggest thing, and it's whether you're with a big bank or a small bank, is having someone in the organization that knows your organization. So before I was with a community bank, I was with Wells Fargo. And if you bank in a big bank, there are officers on one side of the bank. Have someone in your organization become friends with that person so that you have an ally, you have an advocate in the bank. And that's all being part of avoiding fraud, is when someone can identify you. An example is we actually had someone from a nonprofit come into our bank, and the son and father had the same name. Well, unfortunately, the son had a drug problem and came in and tried to withdraw $40,000 from the nonprofit organization. Because our staff knew the organization, knew that that particular person was a lot older that was on the board, we were able to stop that $40,000 being stolen from the nonprofit. So that is a key example of how important it is to become partners with your bank wherever you might bank. Part of the bank's responsibility is also knowing the business practices. For instance, I know when my nonprofits are moving into another building. I know when they have their galas. So we can anticipate cash needs. Many times when nonprofits move, that is a key thing for checks being stolen. So again, it puts us on high alert. Just knowing how to handle your accounts. Again, having a friend as a banker. Many times I go into nonprofits and they have many different accounts, some that they've even forgotten about. And again, that's key for fraud. You might have some little account that's sitting in a bank that everybody's kind of forgotten about because it hasn't been used for years. So again, having a banker review your accounts, and this is a good time to consolidate your accounts because with all the online capabilities, you can, rather than having 10 different accounts for different purposes, you can designate those purposes online. Again, knowing the business needs, protecting the relationship, all of this is part of what it means for us as a community bank and for you to really make friends with your banker. We will often call if there is something out of line. So if you suddenly have a big expense that we didn't know about, just be grateful that your bank is calling you and don't feel threatened by that, but really have your board embrace that the bank can actually be your friend. Can you do the next slide, please? We often do call to verify checks. I'm going to go right to wire requests. Wires are actually one of the #1 new frauds that are happening. We had a situation where someone was trying to wire out, and this is not a small amount, $250,000 out of an account, and this was their capital campaign account. Because of a dialogue with the person, and as Donna and Maya have mentioned, these people that are committing fraud are getting smarter. They are hacking into your online. They know your habits, and this person actually I had a dialogue with and didn't recognize the voice and even said, "Do you have a cold?" And he said yes. So he still didn't know that I really thought that this was fraudulent. The end of the story is that I was able to catch that he was a fraud, and the $250,000 was not wired out of the account, saving not only the organization but obviously the bank funds. I find a lot of pushback when I ask, because boards do change often, officers do change often, and thank you, Maya and Donna, for talking about the corporate resolution, because it might be that I have 2 officers, and like you said, they come into the bank, I trust them, I know them, and I ask for a board resolution or a copy of the board minutes signed by the secretary, and they go, well, why do you need that? I need a corporate resolution. Again, checks and balances are so important. So that is why the bank asked for it. And actually, I've had many people say, well, our other bank didn't ask for that. Well, shame on them, but that doesn't help you. You really want to know that your bank is backing you and knows that everything you're doing is not just for these 2 officers to take the money and go to Fiji. Okay, next slide. Who has access to your checkbook? The biggest thing we find in fraud, and again, I can't see this happening at the Oakland East Bay Symphony, but many times it's a checkbook that's taken out of sequence, and that's exactly why the bank will call if a check is out of sequence. And so that's why it's so important to have access to the checkbook locked up. Also, who has online access? Most banks at this point, and this is something you really need to take advantage of, have abilities to control who has access. So, for instance, you might have one person that has the ability to make transfers. We can even custom design it so that they can only transfer a certain amount. You can have other people that can only view the account. All of these are important, and I can't stress enough, and I know this happens all the time. If you have someone that leaves, let your bank know, get them off the accounts immediately. I had someone yesterday that actually said, well, this person's been gone for 3 months and I'm just using their password. Absolutely unacceptable. The whole reason that we have those safeguards, so if there is something wrong going on, we know it's under that particular person's watch. Do not share passwords. And I know especially in smaller nonprofits where everybody's kind of wearing the same hat, but I can't stress that enough. A lot of people have the facsimile signature. Again, I like a hard signature, old-fashioned that way, but it keeps my nonprofit safe. Next slide, please. As I mentioned, and this is something I teach all my small businesses, I teach all my new account holders. If someone opens up a new account for the first time, it's like brushing your teeth. You check your banking account online every single day. You should do it for your personal account, and as a fiduciary of your nonprofit's money, you should definitely do it for your nonprofit account. It takes a couple minutes, and if you're checking daily, then immediately you will know if something's amiss. If you're checking it only at when you reconcile the statement once a month, it's not as easy to catch, and that's why so many times when we find about fraud within an organization, it's been going on for months and months and months, because they'll just take a little bit, say, wow, I got away with this, and continue to taking. If you're checking daily, that's not going to happen. Consolidate your accounts to view more accounts online at one time. Again, the old school used to be to have accounts in all different kinds of banks. You really, there are ways that you don't need to do that, and to get FDIC insurance, that's another conversation. I'm happy to discuss the different ways to insure more money, but banks do have that ability. You don't have to put them in different banks. So again, that helps you see what's going on. And that also will let you know, because I have to say 70% of the nonprofit funds that I review have bank accounts that they opened 10 years ago, 12 years ago, and have simply forgotten about it, or will say, oh yeah, we opened it for that, but we don't use that anymore. Well, you know what? Consolidate it, and it might mean you'd get more interest on a check on a savings account. It might bring you to another level. So consolidating your accounts is a good thing. Obviously, monitoring your credit cards. Again, there's so much you can do online now. Report anything suspicious. The bankers really need your help in that. We many times catch it before you do, but if you have any ideas, again, it's good for us to know, and we tend to see when things are posting before you do. So if you have any suspicion, it's always good for you to let us know. Next slide, please. Again, easy access to account information does allow someone else to come in, and again, just protection. It's on any of this, and I think Maya has stressed, none of this is personal. You are fiduciaries for this organization that you work so hard for. We have in the banking business, don't trust anyone, and you really should have that same feeling. I know it sounds cruel, and anybody who knows me knows I'm not cruel, but you have to approach your funds that way. Employees with multiple job tasks definitely have greater authorization, and again, I think that's what we've said over and over again. Definitely having board members involved overseeing, definitely having checks and balances in placing, and again, I can't stress, because with a lot of staff members there's a lot of turnover, a lot of people just forget to call the bank and say that someone is no longer working, and please do not honor any checks, and make sure to cancel any kind of online access or credit card access or debit card access. The main thing that I would like to get across is to say the bank can be your partner, can be your friend. We're not the enemy. We definitely appreciate what you're doing, and I'm happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Okay, now we have about a few minutes, Donna, so just if you can wrap it up.
I'm going to go very quickly on the insurance slide that you can see talks about various different kinds of insurance, and I'll mention a fidelity bond is merely a separate policy for employment or employee misconduct rather than a part of your overall liability coverage. But again, as I mentioned earlier, don't rely on insurance to save you because the protection is not complete. They will not cover board negligence. In other words, you can't say, well, we made a big mistake, but somebody else will pay for it. They will fight that pretty rigorously. And our best advice, of course, is to consult with the expert, your insurance broker, to talk about what best suits your situation. And so let's move on to our last slide, so we'll have time for some questions. Okay, to wrap up some thoughts, I hope first of all that all of you got something out of this webinar. It's easy to believe, and we all do believe, that fraud would never happen in our organization. So it's easy to tolerate the circumstances that lead to fraud, like a finance staff person who never takes a vacation, or someone who works long hours but is too busy to get a report out. It's easy to ignore hints of misconduct, like, say, missing invoices, bank statements that don't reconcile. The point here is be alert, take immediate action to investigate anything that seems the slightest bit suspicious. This way you can shut down any dishonesty before it leads to financial disaster. As I mentioned earlier, some financial frauds go on for years before they are discovered. There have been some national huge organizations that fell into this. You want to encourage everyone in your organization to speak up if they see the slightest hint. Excuse me. We don't want to say after the fact, oh yeah, way back when I saw this. Why do nonprofits not want to publicize fraudulent conduct? Excuse me. Obviously, we're rightly concerned what our donors and patrons think, how the staff will react, what this does to future fundraising and ticket sales. But the offenders count on this. So it doesn't really help us in the end if we dismiss an offender for some small or what we think is a small offense and sort of thank our lucky stars that it wasn't worse. But that is in fact what happens, And that is why offenders know that nonprofits are a great place to be. So the last bullet point of something Dale mentioned, trust. Trust but verify. This comes from Ronald Reagan, who meant it as powerful advice for the world of politics. But I think it's a perfect motto and mantra for all of us. Now let's get on to questions.
Okay, thank you, Donna and Maya and Dale Marie. And I am not showing any questions at the moment, so maybe some people are taking a few minutes to write them. But I do have, it occurs to me that in your organizations, do you have a job description for the board treasurer? Because I'm thinking that, you know, this might be a really useful tool when you're, you know, very often our governance committees, when they work very well and think about the right person for the right job. Sometimes it's a question of, oh my gosh, can you just be the treasurer? There's not much involved. If there were a document that laid out the roles and responsibilities, and I emphasize responsibilities, how do you think that would work?
We do have such a document, Chris. Well, it's part of our board responsibilities, but the treasurer responsibilities are a bit more lengthy and specific than others, as you can imagine. And while they're not incredibly detailed, they do present a big picture of what a treasurer is responsible for. And for me, I feel huge responsibility. And I hope anyone who serves as a board treasurer does likewise. It's sort of the last stop, especially as I mentioned earlier that a lot of board members see the finance role as sheer drudgery, and they think that the finance committee is responsible to monitor the finances. Well, they are at the first level, but every board member is equally responsible. That's, again, the buck stops here.
Yeah, thanks, Donna. We do have a question. How does a bank provide greater than $250,000 account insurances?
Good question, Ursula. There are a lot of different banks that have different programs. One is called the CDARS program, which is a way that, for instance, that we can go out, look at banks across the country, get you the best rate. It's actually held in different banks, but you can see it all within our bank, but they're separate charters, so you are able to get the insurance. You pay for that. Most people don't tell you pay for it, but the way you pay for that is an interest rate. It just means that you're going to get a little lower interest rate on that particular. We also have another program where you have a liquid account. It's not locked up in a CD that people take advantage of, and I'm happy to talk to you more about that. I don't know if I'm going to give you my email, and I can tell you about the ICS program.
Great, thanks, Del Marie. I show Renee has got her hand up, but she hasn't typed in a question, so I'm going to unmute Renee, and if you want to ask a question, you can do it right now. Renee, are you still there? Okay, I don't know what that was about then.
Hey, Chris.
All right, well,
Chris, this is Garrett. Renee wanted to know if there's somewhere that she can receive a sample job description of the board treasurer.
Oh, good.
Okay. Yeah.
Yes. I will send it. Do I have her email? I think I do.
Yes, we'll get it. We'll get it for you.
Okay.
Okay. Are there any other questions? Wonderful delegates. Okay. Well, if not, we'll be sending the slides out. On behalf of ACSO and our board of directors, thank you so much, Maya. Thank you so much, and thank you so much, Dale Marie. we will see all of you at the annual conference at the end of July. Bye-bye.
Great. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye. Thanks.